Hello and welcome to another photography vlog on this channel. And yeah, this time I'm gonna do something a little bit different, because what I'm doing today here is taking a photo actually where I live. So not just in a 200 kilometer distance. So this time we're really in 1 kilometer distance from where I'm actually living. So here I didn't take any photos over the last 9 years, I think, and that's because landscape-wise, it's beautiful, but it's not photogenic. But yesterday I went on a run here, and what I noticed are those branches here in the water, in this little pond. And with the calm water, the reflections just looked so nice. It's just a minimalist scene, and I thought, well, I have to give this a try. Yesterday I just took the cell phone and took a quick photo, which is a good idea. So if you have your cell phone with you, sometimes just snap a few photos. In the evening, I quickly went through processing it also just on a cell phone. So I went for a black and white conversion, and actually I'll show this photo up here. It looked very nice, so very different to what I normally shoot, and I thought today I just have to get back, give it a try with a proper camera. So let's have a look at my setup now. It's maybe a little bit of overkill for this scene, but I thought, why not? I have the long lens at 80 millimeters. So I can really zoom in, and that's important. I just want water and the branches, so also not the reflections in the background. And on this side, really just clear, or not clear sky, clouded sky around it, because this looks very nice. And when I turn this in a black and white image, this looks really like mercury around those branches. I have the polarizer on to control the reflection, and I also have a 3-stop ND filter just to smooth out the water just a touch more, because although it's very calm, there are some ripples, and I just want to have it very flat. And that's really all I'm doing now. I have the cable release. I'm focused on those branches, checking the histogram, usually a good idea, just making sure that I don't clip any highlights or dark tones, which I don't do with this scene, so there's no direct sun. It's a very simple scene to photograph. And now let's just do so. And also wait a bit, because currently there are a few ripples, so I might just stick around here maybe 10 more minutes, see if I can get it even flatter. And then we're gonna head back into the office, and I also show you how I process this image. So today a real start to finish, although it will not be very involved, so really minimalist photo, minimalistic processing, but hope you find this interesting. Okay, so now gonna take a few more photos of this scene and then show you what we get. So back in the office, and I've already opened up one of the photos here in Lightroom, so you can see I have to do some cropping here, because up at the top I have the shore of a little lake. Also I'll do some cloning, and what I said, I will do a black and white conversion, but I will do nothing of that here in Lightroom except for the cropping maybe, because I prefer to work in Photoshop. So a quick glimpse just here how it could look in black and white, so without the distracting colors. I think it's a nice photo, and I'm now gonna process it quickly. So let's first do the typical minimal adjustments. So bringing up the shadows a bit, just making sure I have enough room to play with the black and white conversion later. So as you can see, nothing is clipped here. I have an even exposure. Then I will go back to color, because that conversion to black and white will happen in Photoshop. So let's go down here to the details, bring up the masking, down the radius, down the amount, then lens corrections. And as I said, I want to do some cropping here. So let's just crop in here from the side a bit, from this side just a touch. And I think I'm gonna go with something like that, or maybe even a little wider here, just leaving some space also on this side and cutting away at the bottom. So let's just start with this here. Gonna crop it, and now I'm gonna export it. And that's my typical workflow. I like to export my photos as TIFF, 16-bit, Pro Photo, and then open them up in Photoshop. But you could also directly open an image over in Photoshop. It's just my workflow, because Also, most of the time I have multiple photos which I want to blend, so I usually export them as TIFF and then open them directly into layers. But just use whatever workflow you prefer. So let's export and then head over to Photoshop. So the first step in my processing workflow is usually the cleanup. So let's create a new layer here, grab the healing brush tool, and then just see what we can do about some of those distractions here. So I just sample an area and brush away. And I can do this quite quickly. For some areas I'll take a little more time, but yeah, most of the little distractions can be dealt with very easily. And this process is very boring, so I'm gonna speed this up a little bit for you, so making a little time lapse of it. So I'm gonna now stop it here because it takes quite some time, and also it's not, or it doesn't need to be perfect now. Once I do a little bit more of processing, if I find some places where I need to do more cloning, I can do so later on. But for a first start, let's see the before and after. So it's a bit more minimalistic because I removed some of the distractions. Also, maybe let's get this here, remove it quickly. And yeah, now I think I have a good start. I'll also just flatten it down. Also, I will adjust the crop a bit, so see what 16 by 9 or 16 by 10 looks like. I think I'm gonna go with 16:10 here. So do the cropping, also just remove the pixels around it. And yeah, that's now a good start for further processing. Yeah, and for black and white conversion, I often do a bit of a combination. So sometimes I use the Nik collection, Silver Effects, which I still have, or I use the black and white tool we have in Photoshop. Another thing I like to do is using the gradient map. So let's just start with that. So go here into the gradient map, do a black and white, and voila, already you have a black and white. What you can do, you can control it a bit. So let's put a midpoint here and set this one to a mid gray. And then what you can do here between those three markers, those little squares here, when I pull it to the left, I make the darker area flatter, so less contrasty. And when I pull it a little to the right, I increase the tone curve here, so it's getting more contrasty, and I can do the same here on this side. So pulling it in this direction gives me a little more white, pulling it in the other direction gives me more gray, but I want to pull it just a bit over. And now I can also move this midpoint, so just controlling how much or how bright I want the image. So that's a good start here. Now what I also like to do is use the black and white, which we have here in Photoshop, and I can just tune it. You see here I add some blue, and if I want this I can pull down the blues, but I think that's too distracting, so I pull it up, making it very soft here. Let's see, if I pull down the yellows and the reds, I get more contrast in the branches here. Let's see, the greens don't do too much here, I don't have much green, and the magenta also doesn't do too much. So I focus mostly here on this area, which you see by dragging the blue slider, so just a touch of contrast, but not too much. So this would be too much, too distracting. So let's go with a very fine contrast here. And yeah, now I can combine it. I can overlay this black and white conversion with the gradient map. And now I can even still control this layer beneath. So I have a combination. So this applying some tone curve and this applying some black and white. Let's also bring up the tonal helpers. I have this in another tutorial where I use this solid color layer, or not the solid color layer. Actually, I use another gradient map and I use the red to green. I double click, getting me to the blend options here for the layer styles. I bring up this dark triangle to 250. This shows me the clipping for the bright tones. I bring down the white triangle to around 5 or so. And now I would see the clipping let's just try this. If I now go back into this gradient layer here and change it, if I bring up the dark tones, at some point we should see clipping. Actually don't see it now. Let's see why this is and make sure this is a real black, because that's actually not a real black. So just by using this second gradient map, this helper layer, I noticed that. Also, let's make sure that this is an actual white. Okay, so now we have what we wanted, and I can now fine tune it. For example, you can see if I bring up here the yellows, you see I can remove the clipping a bit. If I bring it down, I get clipping. So I can really fine tune it with just those 3 layers. So this here is actually the tonal helper. So just name it like that, which shows me the clipping. This here is the gradient map, and I can even remove a bit of the opacity of the effect. And then we have the black and white. Now what I can also do here, I can double click and make sure I don't apply it to the very dark tones. So you see this tiny clipping here. If I use this and also with Alt I split it, I don't get the effect from the gradient map on that area, on that dark area. So before and after. And yeah, I think that's a good start. What I'm now gonna do is I add a curves layer above it, and now I focus a bit on contrast. So let's do a slight S-curve. And what I also gonna do is, let me just create a fine vignette. I start with an elliptic shape here. So just making a selection, and then with Control-Shift-I, I'll invert the selection. Now I create another curves layer. This will already have applied this ellipse as a mask. Now I can drag down, make the corners a little darker. And now what I'm gonna do, I blur this mask. Blur, Gaussian blur, use a fairly high radius here, around 500. And now see the before and after. Before and after, and I think here up this top is still a little bit too bright, so let's do another curves and darken this area and also maybe the bright areas. So really pull down on that, and then I invert the mask, Control-I. I grab here the gradient tool from white to transparent, and I just draw down or drag down here, and this basically darkens this area. And I can also use a brush and refine it a bit. So for example here this part got too dark, got too much contrast, so I just use like a 10% to remove some of the effect and slightly adjust this mask, so the before and after. And I can do the same here, because I think down here it's got a little too dark. So let's remove some of this, because we don't want to have too many contrasts. The focus should be here on the center. So now let's see the before and after. Before and after, so it's already going into the right direction. But I think what I also want to do after applying the black and white, then doing some contrast, I want to do some dodge and burn. So I create a layer, and as you can see, this is not rehearsed. I'm just recording this as I first process this image, and that's a typical process. There's a lot of trial and error also. So sometimes I head off in a direction and later go back again, because I realize, that's not the right way to do it. It's never that I instantly know which tools to use and how exactly the final edit has to be. But for now, I think with some dodge and burn, I can make this a little bit more balanced, because up here, this is too bright. So I have this layer at soft light. I go with like 10% black brush and just draw with a soft brush up in this area. So just removing some of this bright parts here. You see before and after, it's already less distracting. Also what I can do, I can use some luminosity masks. So let's get Lumensia from Greg Benz here. I still have a very old version, because I also have an old version of Photoshop, but still, even this old version, this tool is great. Let's just select the lights 4, which I think could be even too small of a selection. And let's just see. This might be a little too less, so let's try the lights 3. It's giving me too much, so I go with the lights 4. What I can also do, I can always go in here into the levels. So once you have this Lumensia preview and adjust it, as I like, so maybe going with something like that. Then I go to the select button, converting this preview I have here into selection. And yeah, now with this selection active, what I can do, I can just do some dodge and burn. So yeah, let's just use a 10% brush and do some drawing. And again, always holding down Alt, I can see before and after, before and after. So maybe even going with 20%. So just darkening the very bright areas, because I think it's too distracting here. I quickly go over this image also here on the side. You see the before and after, so making it a little less bright in those areas. So I now deselected, Ctrl D, the mask again, and let's use 20% and just try to bring in slight vignette. And when I change the opacity, I just use the number keys, so 10 for 10%, 2 for 20, 3 for 30. And I have a separate video where I go through all the shortcuts I use. So you can watch this, I'll link it below. And yeah, just go freestyle now without any selections, without any luminosity masks, just trying to balance the image a bit and removing some of the distracting contrasts, because contrasts are what pull the viewer in. So if you have contrasts or bright areas, also dark areas at the edge of the frame, this will draw the viewer or the viewer's attention. But I want the attention in the middle, so I'm just gonna use some dodging and burning to reduce some of those contrasts. So with a bright brush drawing over those darker areas, and with a dark brush drawing over those brighter areas. And I go very rough here, so I could use luminosity masks again, but I find most of the time it's not even needed. Down here, make this just a touch brighter, evening out the contrasts. So here, this is still a little bit too bright. I think you get the idea. So here's currently the before and after for the dodge and burn. What I also noticed, this cloud here doesn't look too nice, it's a bit distracting. So what I'm now gonna do first, I will flatten down this image. So I'm gonna do Ctrl Shift Alt E, making a new flat copy to give me a new start. And I'll also just delete all those layers because I don't need them. In my workflow, I usually do destructive workflow. I just keep a few flattened layers to be able to go back. So what I'm now gonna do is, again, some clone stamp tool here or some healing, just trying to remove this cloud. And yeah, I think this already looks much better. So the before and after, so much less distraction. Also up here, this cloud, I think also looks a little too distracting. So yeah, let's just remove it and see how this looks. I'll do a few more brushes to make this more natural. Also gonna try the clone stamp tool at 50% opacity, because sometimes the healing brush alone doesn't help, so the blending doesn't work properly, and sometimes it just needs a combination of the two. Yeah, now let's zoom out, see the before and after. I think it's already much better. Now this cloud up here also needs a bit more. It's just too bright. So let's do some stamping, some healing here, removing some of those highlights. The good thing with those clouds, I don't need to be precise with the cloning. It's already very abstract, very soft, so I can just do some brushes and see how it looks. It's kind of a random shape here anyway. Now the before and after, and I can also do another soft light layer, another dodge and burn. Yeah, and as you can see, my processing is quite an iterative process. I'll now flatten down again. So this is the before, and this is the current black and white conversion. So already looking quite nice, but I think now it needs some finishing touches, but first I'm gonna save it. So for the finishing touches, there's one important thing now I need to do. I want to do a black and white conversion here, and this name already contains black and also white. What I currently have is more like a grayscale image, which you see if you look at the histogram. Up here there's a huge gap, so I don't cover the complete range, and it looks very flat. And this usually happens if you're working long on an image. You sometimes are so focused on evening out the image, especially when I do black and white, that I lose the complete picture, so the complete range here. And that's what I'm now gonna do. I use a levels adjustment and make sure that I bring back the contrast. And this is also something I see a lot with black and white images. Sometimes they just don't contain any white, and while we don't want to have complete white, so that's why we have this tonal helper, we still want to cover most of the range here. So what I'm now gonna do is, with a black brush, I'll reduce some of the effect, especially here to the outer parts, so just making sure I don't draw the viewer out. So with 10%, also make sure here where it's getting very bright, I remove some of that effect, and also down here, so I can use this also to bring back a slight vignette here. And here the before and after, so this giving the image much more punch already. And yeah, then there's a final step I want to do. I want to smooth out some of the micro contrasts, and for this I'll use a technique which I show in my Dreamy Details tutorial, which is available on my homepage. I'll not show you the steps to creating that layer because also this tutorial is dragging on for quite a while now. I just quickly create it now and show you the effect and how I use it. So I've now created this dreamy layer here, and it's similar to an Autumn effect, but a little more subtle and also sacrificing less of the details. You don't get haloing so easily. So see the effect, it makes everything softer but still keeping the fine details. But I don't want to apply it at 100%. I want to just draw it in with like 30% here at the edges, just reducing some of the fine contrasts. And then also here in the branches with like 10%, just in some areas reduce a bit of the micro contrast. That's what this layer does. So before and after, you don't even see much of it. It's just very subtle, and you'll mostly notice it if you have a print of such an image. It's not that harsh in some of the areas where it's currently having very strong contrasts. So the before and after, and I think it's going into the right direction. I'll also give it a little crop here, moving in from the lower right side, something like that. And let's check again the tonal helpers, that we don't have pure whites. Let's double check here the levels, make it a little more black and the dark parts, and maybe readjust the bright tones, see how far we can go, something like that. Adjust the mask a bit, so remove some of it here. And yeah, I think for now this is it. I would usually have this image now sit for a day or two and give it another look, but yeah, for the sake of this tutorial, I think we're at the end now. I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, it's maybe not a portfolio image for me because on my homepage I have nearly no, or if I have, only a few black and white images, so I'm more of a color photographer, but I think it was a nice exercise. Also just finding something near where I live, so just keeping the eye open for subjects. And it's also something you can do, especially in those times where there's not so much traveling possible. And yeah, I hope you liked this video. If so, leave a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and yeah, see you in the next one. Bye.